adults cast a ballot in the real election, many of our fellow citizens under 18 will pretend to vote in mock elections. Students across the country who are going to play at voting on Tuesday will be engaging in a kind of make-believe that often passes for real civic education. Students' understanding of themselves as citizens is often still grounded in the mythical stories that we tell ourselves about who we are as Americans instead of the reality. They are myths that begin with, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. They go on to tell about how the Pilgrims and the Indians gave thanks for a bountiful harvest over a turkey dinner. But none of these lessons prepare students to deal with the duty which they will be charged with as American adults, how to become responsible citizens. Joining my panel is Seth Andrew, founder and superintendent of Democracy Prep Public Schools. All right, so I want to move our conversation a little bit because this close to the election, what I want to talk about as a teacher is not just what's going to happen in this election, but what's going to happen going forward. And when I was looking at these tests of national civic knowledge, I was completely freaked out. May of 2011, fewer than 5% are demonstrating advanced levels of knowledge. What kinds of social studies and civics education are we teaching when fewer than 5% of our kids have basic knowledge?
We have a crisis. We have a civic education crisis of unprecedented proportions when we think about the actual knowledge of our electorate and how our government works, how our democracy works. It's broken. We have kids who get out of school, 18 years old, registered to vote, and are unable to understand the issues around them. They get sucked into the vitriol and cynicism and negative politics, and they can't determine truth from lies. And so we have to rethink civic education in America in a dramatic way. I mean, we think about civic knowledge often and what it takes to build civic knowledge, but we really need to be creating a civic dispositions, the habits of individuals coming out of school who actually know what it takes to be a good citizen and become engaged in civic life for the rest of their lives.
So it's one of the reasons that we have trouble telling the difference between myth and fact, or between sort of good arguments and poor ones about our civic culture, because we lie to kids so much early on. I mean, on the one hand, like I get that you need to know the story first before you can deconstruct it, right? So you need to know the Columbus story before you can go back and say, actually, that's not quite how it went down, or Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, but not quite, right? But do we just teach the lie, just teach the myth, and then it's easy for a politician to repeat those kinds of myths later?
Well, let's start with this. We have to teach kids to read, right? So our public schools in America are in a similar crisis because our students are not being able to read critically, think critically at the very foundation. And so if you take those lies, if you take the history books that may or may not be correctly based on the reality of history, or maybe skewed in one way or the other, put together by a textbook publisher, you're not really looking at the core issues. And so what we've tried to do at Democracy Prep in Harlem is say, well, let's get to the core issue. How do we build kids who actually are critical thinkers, critical readers, who can look at issues and deconstruct them, understand the positives and negatives of any individual case that is being made in the public realm, and actually make their own cases. And so we work really hard to build those civic dispositions and then turn to authentic skills. If you have the dispositions and the skills you need to be a good citizen, the knowledge is easy to attain. If you can read, you can understand what you need to learn about history, and that's something that we are focused on in all the wrong directions.
You know, it's interesting that you make this point. I was looking at the fact that Governor Jan Brewer in Arizona, right after signing SB 1070, then signed HB 2281, which stripped these Arizona schools of what they called ethnic solidarity courses, African American history, and particularly Hispanic and Latino history. I know that the Democracy Prep is a predominantly African American school in Harlem. Is there a way, as you were trying to get young people involved, like a relevance issue for helping them to get that critical worldview on their own nation?
There is, but I think people use it as an excuse. We have a black president. Right, like this is not an issue anymore where you can't say I can't relate to politics because there aren't people like me in office. There are now, and so the question is really about the quality of our public schools. Is that when we have schools that are broken, kids are not learning what they need to learn to be able to read and be able to really think deeply about the civic life around them. So with our kids, we try to focus on that really early, is building those dispositions so they can really say, how can I become an engaged citizen when I'm an adult? How can I have impact right now as a student? So our kids are out on election day, not doing mock elections, but doing get out the vote campaigns in nonpartisan ways. They're out there doing a campaign we call I Can't Vote, But You Can. So you'll see them up in Harlem on Tuesday, with their bright yellow shirts saying I can't vote, because they want to let people in Harlem know today's election day, we need to get out, 40% of Americans are not going to turn out on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Despite all of that we're talking about, all the issues, the incredible gravity of this election, 40% of Americans are going to stay home.
Seth, I love that. I'm going to bring the rest of my panel back in as soon as we come back. And as we go to break up.